Okay, so we're going to finish up with the do now in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so today's objective is to be able to identify and differentiate between independent and dependent variables. And this is a really useful skill both in the real world and when applying this concept to like scientific experiments that we'll be looking at a lot more over the course of these next few weeks. Okay, so first let's start by talking about this do now. Can someone first start by just reading this to me? Alex, yes.
Erica was recently ranked the #1 basketball player in Massachusetts. She has the highest points per game, rebounds per game, and free throw percentage. What factors do you think influenced her ranking?
Great, thank you. Now, do some of you have some ideas of what factors influenced her ranking? What factors her ranking depended on? Yes, Erica?
Height.
Height? Okay, great. That's definitely an option. Lindsay?
Rebounds per game.
Rebounds per game. Yeah, these are two things that Erica's ranking as the #1 basketball player in Massachusetts depended on. And this is a great example of the distinction between independent and dependent variables. So independent variables are the variables that are independent, that don't depend on other factors, other variables that are being measured. For example, in this case, the independent variables were height and rebounds per game because they didn't depend on the other factors that we were looking at. And dependent variables are the opposite. They're the variables that we're measuring that depend on the other variables that we change. So in this case, Erica's ranking as the #1 basketball player was the dependent variable because it depended on her rebounds per game and her height and her free throw percentage, for example. So that's kind of the difference between independent and dependent variables. So let's apply that to an actual scientific experiment. Alex, can you give us an example of a hypothesis that we might test?
If I eat a healthy breakfast, then I will do better on my test.
Okay, great. So if Alice thinks if she eats a healthier breakfast, then she will perform better on her exam. So what are the two variables that are involved in this experiment? What's one of the variables, Lindsay?
The breakfast sheets.
The breakfast sheets, right? The healthiness of the breakfast sheets. And Erica, what's the other variable involved in this?
Her performance on the test.
Her performance on the test. Great. So these are the two variables that are involved in this experiment. And one of the variables is the independent variable, and the other is the dependent variable. So, Alex, do you have an idea of which one might be the independent variable?
The healthiness of the breakfast.
The healthiness of the breakfast, because that's the variable that we are changing as scientists in this experiment, that we are changing ourselves. That doesn't depend on the other variable. And now, which is the variable that depends on the healthiness of the breakfast? Any ideas? Lindsay?
The performance on your test.
The performance on your test, because that depends directly, we're hypothesizing that depends directly on the healthiness of her breakfast. So we're testing the dependence of that dependent variable on that independent variable. Any questions? Okay, so we're going to test what you guys kind of have learned so far. I'm going to give each of you a note card with a different variable written on it. And you're going to have a couple minutes to find another person in the class who has a variable that can be either your independent variable or your dependent variable. For example, I have a note card that says the number of hours I studied, and Alex has a note card that says the grade I got on the exam. So we might find each other and realize that she is the dependent variable that depends on my independent variable. So there are different combinations that can happen, but if you can find another person in the class who can be either your dependent or independent variable, and you can explain that relationship. We're going to come back together in a couple minutes and talk about that. Okay?
Okay.